What is going on, guys? How are you doing? So I came back on video today. I got a couple other topics that I want to talk about. Actually two different topics, but I'm going to split them up in different videos because the mouth of the South, I'll go on and it'll be an hour-long video. The first topic I want to talk about is having been homeless. Yes, I was homeless a couple of times in my life, so I know what that's like. I have firsthand knowledge, and I have experiences and advice and things like that, wisdom, because my channel is all about putting out information to others who may have experienced things like I have, maybe have a different take, and then you can put it in the comment section on your take on it, and or somebody who is now experiencing something I went through. My channel is really based on my experiences in life, and since I've had so many, that's why I have so many videos. The last video I posted with my supposed Filipino girlfriend, which wasn't to be true, that one hit hard. That was an hour and 16-minute video. That was a difficult video to make because I missed so many details. I missed so many things as I now watch it, and I'm like, oh, I didn't mention this and I didn't mention that. So that one was hard to do because this is pretty recent. You know, I basically blocked her about 4 days ago, and it really hurts me because I did care for her, but apparently she didn't care for me to the point where she made me a priority at all. So that video, as I said, is like 4 days old now. You can go watch that. It's on my channel. I think it's third one down, because I haven't made too many videos since then. Anyway, getting back onto the second topic that I want to talk about, which, as I said, I'm going to split these videos up, is my experience having lived in Jamaica. And that ties in a little bit to my fourth video that I made ago. My fourth video on my channel, if you go scroll down to the most recent, it'd be the fourth, and that has to do with divorcing at 62 and being alone and broke. My time in Jamaica that I spent there was almost 2 years. It was about a year and a half, and I had moved down there before my divorce. We had split up at one point. I don't know if I mentioned that on that video about my divorce, but yeah, we had split up. She actually left me. And when she left me, I'm like, okay, what do I do now? And I had actually moved to Jamaica, and I stayed there. And I didn't stay there because I wanted to leave. I had a son at the time who was 4 years old. I didn't want to leave. I wanted her to get a clue. I wanted her to realize she needs me as a father. Maybe not a husband, but definitely as a father in his life. And it took her a year and a half to come to that realization, and then I moved back. But I kept my apartment, and I kept my apartment for 20 years. I didn't own it. I paid rent on it. But yeah, I flew back and forth over those 20 years 2-3 times a year. So that's the other video I want to make. My experiences, my time in Jamaica, and how I view Jamaica now as an expat, I guess. So yeah, I'm going to dive into, which one am I going to do first? I think I'm going to talk about my homelessness. Yeah, I think I'm going to talk about that. All right, on to story time. Oh, and by the way, my videos are not really a visual treat, because all you get to see is my ugly mug. My videos are more like a podcast, you know, like you could literally turn off your screen on your phone or wherever you're watching from, just turn off the screen and drive down the road and just listen, because it's all my experience. So like I said, a podcast more than it is a video. So as I said, I was homeless twice. The first time I was homeless, and this is a long story too that I got to do a deep dive in. That will be another video on its own. Meaning, when I was a teenager, I was getting in some trouble. As I said, that's a whole nother video on its own. I was getting into some trouble. My mom was a little frustrated because, you know, divorced parents, and she couldn't really handle situations that were going on. And she was dating other guys, and they were trying to pretend like they were my father, and they weren't. And I was pushing back on that. I wasn't a troubled child, but I was definitely looking for the attention that I wasn't getting. And that led to me getting onto probation at one point. And from that, I ended up getting basically kicked out of the house. Not literally, like figuratively. My mom called my probation officer at the time and had me hauled away to juvenile hall. And from there, I had to get my dad, who is long lost at that point, to come pick me up eventually. Well, my aunt came pick me up, and then my dad took over from there. But my dad wasn't the best dad in the world. It's a whole story I'm going to get into about my teenage years. Anyway, fast forward. So he abandoned me after probably 6 or 8 months. It seems longer back then, but it was probably the reality about 6 months or 8 months or whatever. He basically abandoned me by the time I was 16. And I was on the street. I was homeless. It was tough-ish. I have a pretty good head on my shoulder, even back then. I had kind of a situational awareness. I had the thought in my brain that if I get picked up for anything, if I do anything wrong, they're going to take me back to juvenile hall, and I will have to stay there till I'm 18. And I'm 16 at the time. And so the last thing I ever wanted to do was to go back to juvie. And so I kind of kept it on the straight and narrow for the most part. You know, being homeless in LA, a lot of people end up in Hollywood because it's a little easier to do a hustle in Hollywood, you know, with all the tourists and all that stuff. Whether you're begging for money or whether you have a little side hustle selling off little trinkets or whatever the case is. And then of course, you know, they're selling yourself. So there's that. And so it seemed like I'm going to say an easier place to make it, but it was also a more dangerous environment if you hung out with the wrong people. And I kept my nose to myself. Like, I didn't really make any friends. I didn't set out to befriend other homeless people because I don't want to be drugged down. And of course there's a lot of, you know, drugs and things like that are going on too on the street. I didn't want to get involved in that. In fact, at that time, I didn't even smoke pot. I mean, I did, but I only dabbled in it a couple of times and it wasn't for me. So I never even got caught up in that. So I kept it pretty straight and narrow for the most part. I didn't like the idea of literally sleeping on cardboard on the street or tucked away in a corner or whatever. A lot in due to the fact that it's dangerous, that you can get jacked up, you can get robbed and all this stuff. A lot of dangers out there in the world. But also because of bugs. Like, I didn't want a cockroach, you know, coming up my leg at night or whatever. So what I did, it was actually pretty smart. What I did is I would go to an office building, you know, maybe a 5-story, 10-story building or something like that, during the course of the day, and I would find the exit door, the fire exit door, usually in the back of the building, and I would take a little piece of cardboard and I would put the cardboard right where the latch is at, where the lock goes in, because those type of doors don't have a deadbolt. They just have one way out lock mechanism that goes at the bottom lock or at the handle. And so when it's closed, it's not openable from the outside. It's only openable from the inside. And so I put a little piece of cardboard there, and I usually wait until like late afternoon to do that. And I don't think that security or too many people go and check those doors, you know, like either during the course of the day or even at nighttime. So I felt it was pretty safe to do that, and it worked. That little piece of cardboard gave me an open door going into the night, you know, 8 o'clock, 9, 10 o'clock at night. And back then, of course, in the 70s, there wasn't all the alarm systems and cameras and all that stuff that we have now. So I was able to open that door by, whatever time it was, 9, 10 o'clock at night, or whatever time my day was done, I would be able to go up the fire escape, you know, go up the stairs, up the back stairs. Like I would never have attempted to go into the office building proper, but I did go at the fire escape up to the top and just opened the latch to the fire escape and slept up there on building, on rooftops. It was safe. I didn't have to fear for my safety. I didn't have to fear I was going to be robbed. Nobody was around. There was no bugs up there. And the added benefit was by the time the sun came up at whatever time, 6:30, 7 o'clock, it would heat up and it would be like waking me up. I woke up with a headache a lot of times because of the heat sometimes. But it was relatively safe for me to do that. And I felt like the worst case scenario is a security guard came around, caught me, and they would have just trespassed me, or, you know, told me, hey, get out of here, or whatever. Like, they wouldn't call the police on this kid. It was really kind of weird, because I look back at it now, like, you know, when you live your life in your own brain, it's like, oh, okay, this is something I did back then or whatever. But it's not until you look at pictures. I can look at a picture of me when I was 16. I'm going to put one up on the screen. That was before my dad kicked me out. Well, so to be fair, he didn't kick me out. He gave up the apartment we were in. And he's like, hey, if you can afford the rent, you're welcome to stay here, but I'm out. And so it was a split up more than it was him kicking me out. I never asked him why he did that, why he was so dismissive of me as his kid. But in the meantime, I had worked, and I don't want to get a deep dive into that whole story because that's a whole different story. But in the meantime, I had worked at a donut shop. He was having me work to provide some income, and I worked graveyard. And so that picture is me with the donut box and all that stuff. I was proud to, that was like my first real job. I had had paper route in the past, and I walked a dog for an old lady and all that stuff for like $1 a day. But that was my real first job. But I look at myself now through my adult eyes, through my old man eyes. I look at that picture, I'm like, holy crap, look how young I was. Holy crap. I wonder too what people that saw me thought. I didn't look the part. I didn't look necessary. I don't know what a homeless kid looks like, but I didn't really look the part. You know, I always tried to bring across some type of, I don't know, just how I looked there is how I looked on the street. I never, and you know, yeah. Anyway, that's a whole different video. So, there were times on the street where, you know, I did some things that I wasn't proud of, you know, that I definitely wouldn't do now. And, you know, like I said, I'm not going to get into those too much. That's on a different video, different time. But there were some things I did in order to get by. And, you know, it's not easy. It is not easy when you're on the street, especially at that age. The only advantage that I had, I guess if I could say the positive, was that I was a boy and not a girl. You know, imagine a 16-year-old homeless girl, right? All the trouble they can get into. But also the advantage I had that, as I said, I had situational awareness. I had a brain enough not to get involved in drugs, not to get involved in any kind of you know, hardcore crime, or, you know, like, I just was my own person, right? As I said, I didn't hang around any other homeless people. I knew of some, you know, and maybe for a short time we might hang out, but I felt safer having my own responsibility with my own actions rather than facing consequences with somebody else's actions, if that makes sense. So I kind of kept my nose clean for the most part. But I did not like it, and there was no future in it. And getting back to the story that I'm going to tell later in a different video about my teenage years, I wasn't a high school graduate. I had dropped out of 10th grade. Not of my own choice, but of circumstance. So I dropped out of 10th grade. So I wasn't even a high school graduate. I couldn't even get a job if I wanted to if I could, which I couldn't because I would have had a work permit. My mom would have had to sign off on a work permit. But I couldn't even get a job at McDonald's because, you fill out the application. Are you a high school graduate? No. And that was kind of heavy on my mind. Like, what can I do in my life with even that one little document I'm missing, right? And because of that, I think I was probably out for 9 months. I think it was about 9 months. It seems longer. It seems like I was out on that street for 2 years. But in reality, it was about 9 months. In fact, I think it was probably 8 months. And I had an epiphany at that time. I'm like, you know what? I could join the military because that would get me out of this situation. And my first thought was to join the Navy because I like water. I'm a swimmer. I'm an avid, at that time, boogie board and surfing and all that stuff. So, the water thing really appealed to me. And I remember I had gone to a recruiter. I had spoken to a recruiter. I had gone to a recruiter's office. I don't remember which. And basically so to be fair, this is mid-70s, right? And so at that time, they were accepting people in the military. I don't know how it is now, but at that time, they were accepting people in the military with less than a high school diploma if you could pass the ASVAB. The ASVAB is basically an entrance exam. And I would have needed such a high mark to get into the Navy that was not an option. At some point, I had reached out to my mom, and we had been not really talking or anything like that for a bit over a year at that point. But I reached out to her, and she had left California at that time and had moved to Georgia, and with a guy that she was living with and dating and all that stuff. But he got transferred in his job out to Georgia. So she was living in Metro Atlanta at the time. And I reached out to her and I said, I'm not feeling this street life at all, and I need a high school diploma, and it's my thought to get into the military, the Army specifically, but I can't seem to make it happen here. So to my surprise, she kind of climbed on board with that. She's like, I'm going to get back to you. Call me in, I don't know what she said. Call me in 4 days or call me in a week or something like that. So I called her back. And she said to me, I'm going to fly you out here because I've talked to the recruiter out here locally. I've talked to a recruiter and I believe he can make this happen for you. And yes, I will, because I need her signature also, right? I'm coming up on my 17th birthday at that point, which was the minimum that you could join, but you still needed a parental signature on it. So I came out, she flew me out to Georgia, and I met with the recruiter, and he basically signed off on. Recruiters are a little like car salesmen, like they'll manipulate things to their advantage. So for example, you needed at least 10th grade. You needed to at least have gone through 10th grade at that time, and I didn't finish 10th grade. So he basically called my school at the time, which was a continuation high school, and the receptionist or the person at the desk of the school answered the phone, and he basically ended up with her name. Oh, Mrs. Smith? Yeah, this is Sergeant such and such. I'm just checking in to, and so he gave her my name and said, I'm just checking into his education level and blah, blah, blah. And so he got put on hold. She said, well, hold on just a minute. She put him on hold. And then he hung up. And then he signed off on his paperwork basically saying that Mrs. Smith, since he had her name of this particular school, verified that he graduated 10th grade. So that was a bit sneaky, but it worked. So I ended up getting to get in, but I was on the, what do they call it? Delayed entry program, because I wasn't 17 yet. So I could only sign up at the point I was 17, which was a whole nother month, right? So, you know, as soon as my 17th birthday came around in September, I literally raised my hand, and I don't remember the day, but it was a month later. So from turning 17 in September to raising my hand in October is when I joined. Barely 17 years old, my first year in the Army. And I ended up getting my high school diploma while I was in the Army. Anyway, so that's that story of one time that I was homeless. Ironically, the second time I was homeless is after I got out, because I was dumb. Because when you're young, you're dumb. And I didn't save a penny. I didn't save not one penny. It wasn't a lot of money that we made back then. If I'm not mistaken, it was probably $800, $900 a month. You know, and even at a point where I was airborne, you know, we had hazardous duty pay, but that was only $100. Our life was only worth $100 for hazardous duty. So it wasn't a whole lot of money, but again, we're not paying for food, we're not paying for shelter, we're not paying for work uniforms or anything, because, you know, we have our uniform. And so you would think that at least half of that pay could go toward a savings account of some sort, but I was dumb enough not to ever do that. I don't know what I spent my money on, honestly. Probably going to bars and stuff. I don't drink, but, you know, entertainment of some sort. And so when I got out, I had $50. $50. I couldn't even afford a bus ticket from where I was at in Kansas, my last duty station, back to California. And I ended up hitchhiking, when hitchhiking was a thing. And literally, I don't remember how long it took. It was probably 4 or 5 days, but, you know, I ended up hitchhiking from Kansas back to LA, and homeless. So as soon as I got there, I went to a couple local churches, because I figured that was a spot to go to, and knocked on the doors, and I just remember being turned away. I remember not getting any help from a church. That's all I remember. And it was very disappointing. Not that I was a religious person, but they are. And, you know, like, hello, can you help me? And they turned me away. But because I was already familiar with the streets, having gone through that, you know, 3 years earlier, it wasn't that big of a deal. It was just like, oh, here we are again. And all I had the advantage of at that time was my high school diploma. Like, I didn't have any, to be fair, I had benefits that I was unaware of. The only benefit that I knew for sure I had was dental for a year after I got out. But because Carter had basically eviscerated the GI Bill, I didn't have school, and I didn't have all these other things that had been in the GI Bill at that time. So I didn't really have the advantages, and if I did, I didn't know about them. It never dawned on me to go to the VA for help. Never dawned on me. In fact, I didn't even join up with the VA until 2017. I think it was 2017 or 18 that I joined up finally. But I had no clue whatsoever that I could probably have gotten help from the VA at that point. Just didn't even think about it. Eventually, I went to, what was it? It was like, not a soup kitchen, but it was like, I can't put my finger on like an organization, but almost like the Salvation Army, something like that. And I went there for food, and they gave me a box of food, non-perishables, which I could not really use most of it, because you needed to boil water, or you needed to somehow warm these things up or whatever, and I didn't have that ability. And I basically told the person that was in charge that, you know, hey, I'm homeless and I have nowhere to go, and, you know, if you think there's anything you can do. They put me in touch with a couple of people that were renting rooms at the time, and I ended up going to this guy's house and basically telling him my story. You know, I just got out of the Army and yada yada yada, and I want to work which I don't have any work yet. I want to work to be able to pay rent, but I don't have it yet until I find a job. Like, one follows the other. I have to have an address first before I can work. And he understood, and the room that he had for rent, I think he had 3 rooms that he rented in his house, and the room he had for rent, he kind of fronted me. He's like, okay, you know, he was game. He was okay with, you know, me paying him when I could after I got a job. That was a blessing. That was pure blessing. Other blessing that came along, I went out on the bus and I started applying. I got off bus stops and started applying at different places, you know, 5, 6, 8 miles away. And I ended up with this job at a Bob's Big Boy restaurant as, I think it was a dishwasher or busboy, I believe. I think so. And then I thought, oh man, how am I going to get to work? I got to take a bus every day and blah blah blah. And as it turned out, a couple of houses down from where I was at, there was a station wagon that was parked in the front yard that was for sale. And if I'm not mistaken, it was $500. Now that $500 back then was probably equal to about $1,500 or maybe $1,800 now with the money, inflation, and all that stuff. I didn't have $500, but I did the same thing. I knocked on the door. I told the guy my story. I'm like, I'm living right a couple of houses down. I just got a job. I need transportation. I can pay you back later. And he did it. I'm like, ooh, I got a guardian angel. And so that pulled me out of my second homeless situation. The kindness of others. And I did end up paying rent. And I did end up paying for that station wagon. In fact, that station wagon became my house at one point because I said I was homeless twice, and as I'm telling the story, it dawned on me I was homeless 3 times. I worked at that restaurant for, again, time is relative because, you know, you compare it to your time now, and, you know, like, time goes by so fast, but it went by so slow when you were young. I worked at that restaurant for probably a year. And I was promoted pretty quickly to cook. And from cook, I was promoted to assistant manager. I was only like 22, 23 years old or something like that. And I'm assistant manager. I'm wearing a tie and I'm wearing a yellow shirt and all that stuff. And I didn't have that position very long because I ended up dating one of the waitresses who worked there, who was involved with this guy who was a kind of a drug addict. And she was kind of scared of him, and we devised this plan to get together and so she could get away from him. But he made some threats toward me because he found out about us, and he made some threats, and it scared me because I kind of knew her situation. I knew a little bit about him, and I was scared, genuinely scared. And I said to her, I'm out. Like, I'm out. She's like, where are you going? I'm like, I don't know. You know, I flipped a coin. It was like Santa Barbara heads, San Diego tails. But I'm not staying here. And she said, I want to go with you. And I'm like, okay. So we ended up living in the station wagon. Technically still homeless, but at least a roof over our head. So we get to Santa Barbara and didn't really have a plan. Not that you have a plan when you're homeless, but we had a bed. Like, we could just, in fact, I had gotten a twin mattress and put it in the back of the station wagon, and then I had some black curtain, well, homemade curtain anyway, that, you know, the driver's area, I could put a curtain up there. I also took spray paint, black spray paint, and blackened out all the windows in the back so you couldn't see in. So it was relatively safe. And we would park up in front of Denny's or Sambo's, or I didn't even think about Walmart at the time. Walmart was really a thing at the time. But anyway, we would park where we could, where it was generally well lit and all that stuff. I also remember I had a plug-in black and white TV, you know, plug in to the lighter so that we could watch TV somewhat. Back when they had stations instead of cable. You know, like, yeah. we struggled a little bit to make a living. I remember vividly that we were collecting cans. You know, Santa Barbara is kind of a beach community, so we would go out to the little walkway at the beach, and we would go into trash cans and collect. She would go one way with the bag, I would go another way with the bag, and we would collect cans because we could get whatever it was, 10 cents a pound, or whatever the amount was that we could make some money, some, you know, like dinner money. I remember we would go into the YMCA to go shower. On hot days, we could shower at the beach because you know, have outdoor showers and all that stuff. But you know, with your shorts on or something. But I remember going to the YMCA frequently to go have a shower and get shaved up and all that stuff. We didn't look homeless, and so that's another thing, that just because when you see people on the street, you have a vision of what a homeless person looks like. Generally, that is strung out. That's strung out on drugs or alcohol or both, or have some mental issues or whatever. That is the picture that's painted of a homeless person. And even when the other 2 times when I was homeless, I never looked it. I didn't, again, I had self-awareness. I had pride. And I wasn't going to look all raggedy. I wasn't going to, and I never begged. You know how you get homeless people on the center divider of a at a stoplight or something like that, and they got a sign out there. That's a tough pill to swallow. Like, I don't know. I might do it now if some circumstance made it to where I'm in that position again. I might do it now, but back then, there was no way. No, my pride, and I don't even think now I would do that. I think I would rather wash windows at a traffic light, you know, that squirt bottle, and, you know, doing that. Like, do something proactive to earn your money rather than just beg for it. I don't know. It just set me in a, it didn't even dawn on me. Didn't even dawn on me. One day we were, I remember this vividly. One day we were out collecting cans, and between 2 houses there's like this block wall, short one, about 4 foot tall. And one neighbor had their block wall, another neighbor had theirs, and in between there was a gap. And that gap was probably, I don't know, 10 inches or something like that. And wedged in between that gap at the bottom was like this bomber jacket, this leather bomber jacket. And, you know, it had some wear and tear on all that stuff. It may have had some mold or whatever, but I grabbed it. And I thought, ooh, I got a free jacket. Maybe I can go pawn it or whatever. And I searched the pockets, and there was $50 in the pockets. There was $50 in the pockets. I don't know how that jacket got there. I don't know who put it there. If somebody got robbed and they threw it away because they didn't do what I did. But regardless, that was a good day. We got to go to a restaurant, a proper restaurant, sit down and eat. We got to get, back in the day when Motel 6 was $19.95 or whatever, we got a hotel room and got to get cleaned up proper and all that stuff. At a certain point, and I made a video already about celebrities that I've met, and I ended up with a customer. Well, strike that. I'm going too far ahead. So at a certain point, I'm like, you know, let me do something proactive to get us out of this situation. So in the interim, she had gotten a job, apparently, if I remember right, apparently at this restaurant as a waitress. And to have the job, she needed an address and all that stuff. So I ended up renting, and it wasn't a whole lot of money. I think it was $10 a month or whatever, but I rented this P.O. box. You know, not proper, but, you know, like one of these, like a UPS store or something like that, but it was privately owned. And so I could have mail sent there, 136 Victoria Street. I remember the address. So 136 Victoria Street was my address. And in addition to that, they provided a phone service. So I got an answering service. Like, they would answer the phone where I had a phone number. This is way before cell phones or anything like that. So, you know, you needed a phone number. And because of that, she was able to get this job at a restaurant and, you know, make tips and stuff like that. And and climbed our way out of this situation to the extent that we had money coming in. In turn, I started a little window washing business. I bought a squeegee, and I bought a bottle of, that I could put Windex in or whatever. No, it wasn't Windex. I bought ammonia and water, I think is what it was. I think that was cheaper. The ammonia was cheaper than the Windex. Any which way, I started doing washing windows, along the beach area, little shops and stuff like that. And I would charge, $10 for the inside and $10 for the outside, or to give a discount, instead of 20, it'd be 15 for both in and out or whatever. And I built up that window washing business to the point where I was able to get some cards made, and eventually I started passing out these cards at grocery stores and different places. And long story short, because I already went over this, and I think I went over this in another video, but anyway, I started this window washing business that gained some speed, and eventually got this guy John Beck, who was an actor at the time on Dallas, and I had no idea who he was. She pointed him out when I drove up there to give an estimate, and I was doing okay. I was doing okay. We were doing okay. But after about 6 or 8 months or something like that, I was still living in the station wagon. Santa Barbara is very pricey, so to get a room or even an apartment was a stretch. And she got tired of that life and decided she was going to join the Air Force. And so she kind of left me, and I ended up deciding that I wanted something more out of my life, and thought, what am I going to do when I grow up? And it dawned on me, I would like to be a fireman for a lot of different reasons, and I'll get into that part on a different video about my careers and jobs and things that I've had. But anyway, yeah, I didn't really reach out. The only time I reached out to my mom after she put me out was when I joined the Army. I needed her signature. And then at this point, when I was about 23-ish, 23, 24, and I reached out to her, and I was basically telling her how I wanted to be a fireman and how difficult it would be to go through a fire academy and all this stuff, blah, blah, blah. And that one thing led to another. I ended up selling the station wagon. I ended up selling the little window washing business I had, and I had no idea how to sell a business. What I did is I took that book of customers, and I just added all the numbers together about what I made, and I don't know, $900 or something like that, whatever it amounted to. And I found another window washer, this guy that had his own business, and I sold him the book. And he's like, well, how do I know these customers will sign up with me? And well, call them, because I've already told them all that I'm going to transfer this business over. What I did not know then is that you could sell a business basically for like 3 times what it's worth, or whatever the case is. I could have gotten like almost $3 grand out of this guy, but I didn't know. I was just happy to get the money. So I gave him the book. He gave me $900, and I gave him the book. And then I flew out. She was living in Florida at the time. And she flew me out to Florida. And she ended up putting me in this small little tiny studio apartment with this old lady, and bought me this raggedy car and paid for the tuition for the fire academy. And so that's the end of that story. But yeah, those 3 times in my life that I was homeless, but not, like I said, in the sense that you think homelessness looks like. And everybody has their own story, and I'm sure people will chime in the comment section about their story if it ever happened to them. But yeah, I've had some difficult times in my life. I'm not spring chicken by any stretch. If I lost my home today and became homeless, I'd know how to make it. I would know what to do and what not to do, and I would be able to do a hustle, and I would not immerse myself into, I would not get with people that would drag me down, because I never want to be in a situation like that for any length of time longer than a year. And I crawled my way out 3 different times. So yeah, that's my story about having been homeless before. A lot of times people misjudge you because, they might see, oh, well, you're doing pretty well. You've had a good life. You've went to college and you did this, they think because of the way you dress or because of what you drive or whatever, that you've had it easy. When most people don't know the other person's story. I'm 100% positive nobody knows my story because I've just now told it. But I think it's inspirational to some people, especially as I said at the beginning of the video, younger people who are just now going through this or are in the midst of it, you know, to know that there's a saying, nothing lasts forever. This too shall pass. So if you're motivated, if you got your head screwed on straight, and that's the most important thing, as bad as you think it is, it won't be that way forever if you don't want it to. You have to be motivated enough not to want it to. And you have to keep your nose clean. You have to stay out of trouble, and you have to do your hustle and struggle and all that stuff to get through this bad time, but it won't last if you don't want it to. You can bring yourself up and out. And I play it forward sometimes. I remember a couple of years ago I had this this e-bike that I had bought relatively cheaply, but I bought it brand new, and within a couple of years the battery just wouldn't really it wouldn't charge, and all you could do is pedal it, right? And I'm like, wow, this thing's, I'm not gonna invest money in this little bike. And there were some homeless people out here where I'm at currently, and so I just loaded that in the truck, and I thought, well, next time I see somebody, I'll just give it to them. And that's what I did. And this guy, I pulled over, I saw him, and it was obvious he was homeless, and I just pulled over. I'm like, hey, could you use a bike instead of walking around? He's like, sure. And so I gave it to him, and he was very appreciative, and he rode off on it, and I saw him, you know, weeks later in different areas riding it and all that stuff. And I just, you know, sometimes if you give a homeless person $5, you know, they're going to go out and buy, you know, a 6-pack, or they're going to go out and try and support their habit or whatever. And I just feel like I could do that, and I've done that on many occasions, but I feel better about giving them something tangible, something that can kind of help them out. Whether it's clothes, or whether it's blankets, or whether it's, you know, whatever it happens to be, to kind of help them out in their situation. Yeah. Anyway, I'm rambling again. That's it. That's all I have to say about that. Yeah, on to the next video, which I'm gonna probably make right now after I finish this off. Has to do with my time in Jamaica. Yeah, man. That will be an interesting video because I have a lot of experience in Jamaica, and a lot of things, a lot of tidbits, a lot of nuggets that I could put out there, you know, for people maybe that are now in Jamaica that don't have that 20-year experience that I have. Because I run across YouTube videos of people who move to Jamaica and think it is, think that they've discovered a diamond. You know, I used to look at it like a diamond in the rough. But a diamond in the rough is still a piece of coal. And that piece of coal, that rock, I don't believe will ever be a diamond. That's my thought on it. So stay tuned for that video. Later, guys.